A brief little video about the lecture that was supposed to be on Wednesday. I feel like that's right. We had talked about the structure of the structure of the phospholipid bilayer, and how it's mostly made up, how the cell membrane is mostly made up of phospholipids, but also including proteins and stuff like that, and receptors and all that kind of good stuff. So today, what I really wanted to focus on was how things pass through the cell membrane. So we'll just dive right into that. Okay, so the purpose for the cell membrane is to maintain homeostasis. And we remember that the homo or the homeo prefix means same. So inside our bodies, we want to always maintain the same internal temperature, the same internal amount of water, the same salt and sugar levels. All those things need to stay the same inside our bodies for us to stay healthy. The same is true of cells. So cells are going to want to stay the same on the inside. They want to keep the same amount of water on the inside of them. They want to stay the same amount of sugar on the inside of the cells, all that good stuff. So they need to stay the same. And the cell membrane allows the cell to maintain homeostasis by allowing things to come in that the cell needs and kicking out things that the cell does not need. Cell membranes are referred to as selectively permeable. This means that only certain things can come in and certain things can come out. Because if you think about it, you don't want just anything inside the cell, like a virus or bacteria would be really bad to get inside the cell. But certain things do need to come in. Or like water, like it's good to have water inside the cell, but if there's too much water flowing in all at once, then the cell can pop. So it's selectively permeable, only certain things can come in and come out at certain times. So cells constantly need nutrients and molecules brought into the cell, and they constantly need waste removed from the cell. The cell membrane has a few different methods that allow things to come in and kick things out. So again, selectively permeable is kind of an important thing to remember from this slide. Okay, so there's 5 different types of cell transport. There's types of cell transport that requires energy and types that do not require energy. And again, when I say cell transport, I mean like things coming into the cell or things leaving the cell. So this one right here is going to be active transport, and we can see that energy is required in the form of ATP. Remember, ATP is the cell's energy currency. That's how cells spend energy or use energy. And it also requires a protein channel, so you can see that whatever this molecule is, this blue molecule that's coming into the cell, it is not just passing through that phospholipid bilayer. It has a specific channel that it's passing through. So active transport requires energy and a channel. We see bulk transport. Pretty much bulk transport via endocytosis or exocytosis, we'll talk about that in just a little bit, is where a part of the cell membrane is kind of pinched off and it sort of creates like a little escape pod for that molecule to leave. So but both of those two things require energy. There's also some that does not require energy, and so that's going to be osmosis, diffusion, and facilitated diffusion. Of those, only facilitated diffusion uses a protein channel. All right, so diffusion and osmosis. So diffusion is when molecules or ions move from a high concentration to a low concentration. And this happens naturally without any energy. I always describe concentration like how close you are to other people, actually. So the example that I have is I really don't like tight spaces. So whenever I get into a crowded elevator, I am very uncomfortable. And that's a high concentration of people, people in your space. So as soon as those elevator doors open, I'm going to want to get away from all those people. I'm going to spread out. So I go from a high concentration, tightly packed with other people, to as soon as those doors open, I'm going to spread, moving to a low concentration where I have space. So that's how molecules, ions, that's how everything in the universe is actually going to behave. Molecules want to seek where there's not much space, where there's more space. They want to be spread out. They want to be at a low concentration. So this happens naturally, does not require any energy. So whenever you're thinking of high concentration, think packed in an elevator, and then low concentration is spread out and kind of outside of the elevator. That's kind of my analogy or example. Osmosis is the diffusion of water. So that's going to be water going from a high concentration, which means tightly packed together, to a low concentration, which means nice and spread out. And then there's 3 different kinds of movements of water. So water is going to behave very predictably. And there's 3 different types of solutions that we talk about. Solution just means the stuff on the outside of the cell. And usually we're talking about like something being dissolved in it. For example, like dissolving sugar in water, like your Kool-Aid or your lemonade mix, like dissolving that in water is going to make a solution, something dissolved in water. If there's lots of solutes, again, solute just meaning the stuff, either the lemonade, the Kool-Aid powder, the salt, the sugar, whatever you're talking about, the stuff, there's a lot of stuff inside the cell, so lots of solute inside the cell. Water's going to rush in because when water comes in, it kind of spreads that concentrated solute out. All right, we call that hypotonic, and I remember that because if water comes in, the cell's going to get bigger, like an O, hypotonic. That's describing what the cell looks like as it grows, as water comes in. So lots of stuff, lots of solute inside the cell. Water's going to rush in, the cell's going to get larger. If there's lots of solute outside the cell, so maybe there's lots of salt, lots of sugar, lots of Kool-Aid, whatever it is, outside the cell, then water's going to leave the cell to try to spread out that solute there. That's going to cause the cell to shrink because all the water is leaving the cell. We call that hypertonic. Hyper means too much, hypo means too little, and we're referring to the stuff outside the cell. All right, if there's an equal amount of solute on both sides, water's going to move in and move out of the cell evenly, and it's going to create, like, the cell's not going to change size. So hypotonic, hypertonic, and isotonic is all referring to the solution outside of the cell. We'll go a little deeper into hypotonic, hypertonic, and isotonic later. All right, so we also have facilitated diffusion. So in regular diffusion, molecules just move straight into the cell or out of the cell without using a protein tunnel or channel. It can just go straight through the phospholipid bilayer, like you can see that in this picture over here. Okay, facilitated diffusion does use a membrane channel to pass through. Maybe it's because that particular solute was too big. Maybe that solute was charged a particular way. But either way, facilitated diffusion still does not use energy. It's still going from high to low concentration, which does not require any energy. But it does use a protein channel. So it goes with the concentration gradient. When we say that, we mean, again, from high concentration to a low concentration, from tightly packed to spread out. That's with the concentration gradient. And again, that's going to happen naturally. Active transport does use energy, so and in the form of ATP, and that's what's going to help get the molecules into the cell or out of the cell. But active transport goes against the concentration gradient. That means it goes from a low concentration to a high concentration. In my elevator example, since I don't like being in tight spaces, you're going to have to either pay me or knock me out or just shove me into an elevator kicking and screaming. It's going to take a lot of energy to go against the gradient, to put me in a crowded elevator at a high concentration. Molecules are the same way. You have to kind of convince them to go against the gradient by giving them energy. So going against the gradient is always going to use energy, and against the gradient means from a low concentration to high concentration. And different molecules and ions have different channels that they use. So sugar is going to use a different channel than salt would, or potassium is going to use a different channel than hydrogens would. So they all have a specific channel that they pass through. All right, last one is bulk transport. So it's another type of active transport that does require energy in the form of ATP. And bulk transport is referred to endocytosis, endo kind of sounding like in, and then exocytosis, exo kind of sounding like exit. So endocytosis is going to be putting something into the cell. Exocytosis is going to be removing something from the cell. And you can see it kind of looks like the cell membrane is being pinched off a little bit to create a new small membrane around whatever substance it is. And we call these new little small membranes a vesicle. I think of it as a little escape pod. And this occurs, if something is too large for a particular channel. Maybe it doesn't have a specific channel to pass through, or maybe there's just too much of that substance. Oh, okay, I guess I already have that filled out. So this is kind of a review. So for diffusion, energy is not required. A channel is not required. It's going with the gradient. Again, if it's going with the gradient, it probably does not require any energy. Large molecules cannot just diffuse straight through the plasma membrane, and then charged molecules really aren't allowed. Osmosis is just water, so all of these are going to be the same answers here. Large molecules, water is water. It's not going to be any larger or smaller, and then water is not going to have a different charge. It's always going to have the same charge. Facilitated diffusion does not require energy, which also means it goes with the gradient. It does require a channel, however. And I'd say like medium-sized molecules are allowed, and then charged molecules are allowed as well. Active transport does use energy, meaning it's going against the gradient from a low concentration where everything is spread out and then pushing it into a higher concentration. So it does require energy. It does require a specific channel, and this is going to allow charged or medium-sized particles. Bulk transport also requires energy. Doesn't necessarily require a channel because it's kind of creating its own little vesicle. And it can be going with the gradient or against, doesn't really matter, I guess. Large molecules are allowed, and charged molecules are also allowed. All right, so I think that's about all we needed to cover.